Welcome back to Sunday Night in America. Our founding fathers warned us about the dangers of political parties and factions. But they also understood human nature. People tend to vote in their self-interest and associate and agree and vote with those who share their views or station in life. And while you cannot change human nature, you can certainly try to tame it. Some of our founders thought the size of the country would reduce the likelihood of factions. The bigger the country, the more diverse the people, the less likely it would be for factions to dominate. Others believed having a republic rather than a pure democracy would limit factions, creating a buffer between the people and the decisions might lead to more consensus. If only they could see us now. We have become exactly what they feared. We are, in fact, a center-right country. The polling indicates that. Elections prove that. The elections right after the elections confirm that. The question is, how do you get to center-right? You can do what we do, which is have the left and the right pull as hard as they can, and because we're a 50-50 country, all that pushing and pulling essentially results in a stalemate. The other way to get to center-right is to just simply start there. No pushing, no pulling, just start slightly to the right of center and stay there. But we don't do that. There is no constituency left for center-right people. Look at Congress. In the 2020 elections, only 17% of the congressional races were decided by less than 10 points. Stated differently, over 80% of the congressional races in this country were landslide victories. 10 points is a landslide in politics. We become a nation of primary districts, meaning if you win the primary election, you're going to win the general election. The general election has become irrelevant. The real race is in the Republican or Democrat primary, and that's what redistricting has done. Congress is two big factions elected by smaller factions. In my district in South Carolina, a Republican is going to win in November no matter what. That's the way the district is drawn. Jim Clyburn, also from South Carolina, is going to win in November no matter what. The primary is what matters, and the way to win the primary is to be the most progressive or most conservative candidate in that primary. On election night, South Carolina will elect 6 Republicans and 1 Democrat. I can tell you that right now. I cannot tell you who those Republicans will be because some incumbents are in contested primaries, and the issue, as you will have guessed by now, is who is the most conservative candidate in that primary. And the same is true on the other side. The so-called squad started with 4 members and has already grown, and it will grow more. Moderate Democrats will be challenged by more progressive Democrats. The more progressive Democrat will win the primary. We will have a Congress full of the most conservative and most progressive members possible. Congress will consist of the squad and the Freedom Caucus. Some of you may think that's good. Others will not. The most interesting question to me is, how did we get here? Human nature explains some of it, but not all of it. What drives the division now is a fundamental disagreement on the role of government. Is government supposed to be large and the answer to every question and take over every aspect of our lives, eventually making the need for states or any other political subdivision obsolete? Or are we, as I believe, a nation with a federal government of limited and discrete powers, enumerated powers? Are we a nation where personal responsibility plays a role? Is the federal government really responsible for our education and our health care and our retirement? Are we a cradle-to-grave ward of the state? Are we a nation where the states are free to experiment? And California and South Carolina can do things very differently. What is the role of the federal government? What is the role of the state government? And my favorite question of all, what is the role of the individual? And that's the debate. And whoever wins that debate will have the bigger faction. And then it won't be called a faction anymore. It will be called the ruling party. Joining us now is Fox News contributor and Washington Times opinion editor Charlie Hurt. Charlie, I hate to start by saying, tell me if I'm wrong, because I know you will, and there's a chance I am. But it does seem like more and more districts are what I call primary districts, and there are fewer and fewer general election districts. So, number one, am I right? Number two, is it good or bad, or do you have an opinion on that?
Well, of course you're right, and of course the founders worried about this, and they were shocked, even within their own lifetimes, by the rise of faction and by the rise of parties, which they lamented. But as you point out, they worried about everything because they were students of human nature, and of course we've proven them very wise to worry about everything, because if it's breakable, we will break it. If it's possible to screw it up, we will find a way to screw it up. We have 215, whatever it is, I don't do math, 220 years of screwing it up. But I still believe that the system that they built is a system that has managed to do a pretty good job over the centuries of keeping us somewhere within the ditches. And then on top of that, I'm just sort of hopelessly predisposed to being hopeful about these things. And I think, and you know, to go to this current election that we're dealing with right now, with where you have the rise of the squad, and you have, and you know, clearly the squad within the Democratic Party is going to become a whole lot more powerful within the Democratic Party, especially because they're going to lose power in the House, and so that smaller, louder, more insane faction is going to become all that much more powerful. But it's also why Democrats are going to lose control of the House. And so in a lot of ways, the way the situation goes now is we're sort of fighting with meat axes as opposed to scalpels. And that's not what you and I want. What I want is 535 Trey Gowdys who can walk in there and say, okay, let's come up with a reasonable. And I think if you picked 535 people from my hometown, they would, within about 2 weeks, solve 90% of the problems to 90% of the satisfaction of 90% of the people in America, and then we wouldn't be talking. Then you and I wouldn't have jobs. Because there would be no value in covering all of this stuff except from sort of an academic standpoint.
You know, Charlie, I've always liked you. I served with your brother, whom I found your brother to be conservative by any definition, although I would not be surprised in the current environment if somebody did not run against him to the right. So if we're a center-right country, it seems like we could get there by doing what we're doing now, which is pulling as hard as we can, or we could just elect center-right people, or am I just too naive?
Well, I think there's one thing that we're sort of missing here, and that is the role of the media in all of this. And as somebody in the media, I tend to hate the media more than I hate anybody else, because I realize the degree to which they lie about things and they distort things. When we talk about the crazy radicals on the left, they're talking about free health care for illegals. They're talking about abolishing ICE. They're talking about defunding the police. This is really nuts stuff. Democrats don't support this stuff. On the right, and that's where all the extremism is, according to most people in the media. When you talk about a conservative, I mean, a radical on the right or an extremist, they want to enforce the laws to enforce the border. They want to stop printing money. They wanted to, you know, and these are hardly radical ideas. These are the most sensible ideas on the planet, yet they're the ones that get portrayed by the media as these crazy radicals, and yet their ideas are far more popular and far more winnable than the lunatic fringe ideas of the squad on the left.
You know, Charlie, if you can win the debate over language, you can win the debate.
Yes,
and
sir.
I think that is the point that you are making, is you can be ultra-conservative, but you can't be ultra-progressive. So, look, I can't thank you for joining me on a Sunday night, because I know you want to be watching sports. But I'm going to have you back, and we're going to keep following these politics, okay?
Hey, Sean Hannity here. Hey, click here to subscribe to Fox News YouTube page and catch our hottest interviews and most compelling analysis. You will not get it anywhere else.